Good morning, everyone, and welcome again to Conscious Conversations. We're live from Fitness for the Body, Mind, and Soul in Hendersonville, North Carolina, and it's September 25th, 2011. And we have a guest who actually came all the way from Nashville, Tennessee, and a wonderful spiritual teacher, a good friend of mine for a long, long time, and has many wonderful, great messages to share with us today. Just to give you a little introduction, Linda, I met years ago. We were actually talking the other night about how we all came together, and she showed up and immediately immersed herself in many of the things we had at our center in Florida, one of which was becoming a healing touch practitioner. She went to many of the activities, eventually went into Alliance of Divine Love Ministry, that which I'm ordained, and many of you as well, and also eventually became our music minister. So there's a funny story there too, but I won't go into all those details because we could go on for hours. But I do want to introduce Linda now. She's moved to Nashville from Florida, and her daughter is pursuing her dream as a country music, or actually a pop singer. Her daughter's a pop singer and a songwriter, and Linda and her husband John, being the supportive, loving parents they are, moved to Nashville to support their daughter's dream and to keep the family going, and it's really a wonderful story. Also, Linda is, as I mentioned earlier, a wonderful Alliance of Divine Minister, but also ordained, which we're going to talk about in a minute because this is very interesting. She's an ordained Catholic priest. Now, how did that happen? We're going to find out there. And no, you don't have to pull her pants down to figure this out. She's really a woman and she's a priest, and we're going to figure it out. And but anyway. I know I'm embarrassing some guys. I just can't help myself. What should I say? It's like I'm channeling and these things come out, and I apologize. No, I don't. Not really. But anyway, so we've got lots of great things to talk about today, and Linda, welcome.
Thank you very much.
I think. Yeah, that's right. Now she's getting nervous. She's red and nervous. I told her, don't be nervous. You'll be comfortable with this.
Okay. I'm not comfortable.
Okay, good.
I'm really kind of excited to talk about the priesthood, actually.
Yeah, well, actually, that's where I wanted to start. So tell us about the priesthood and how that actually came to be and what you can do and can't do as a priest.
Okay. Well, I grew up Roman Catholic. God decided I'd be born into a family that raised me Roman Catholic, and I was always fascinated with it. Didn't buy into all the fear stuff, you understand. And as I grew up, I was always fascinated with two very strong symbols. That was the Sacred Heart, which we now know is the chakra in the center of our being, not the organ to the left. And both on the female and the male, not just on the Christ images, but the one on Mary as well. That always interested me, and nobody would ever explain it. I'd ask the nuns, and you don't need to know that. And so I needed to know that. So it set me on a path. And the other thing that I really stayed with me was the ritual. I love ceremony and ritual. And so as I grew, I actually was a music director in a Roman Catholic church for 12 years. And had a lot of friends who were priests and nuns, and when we had our conversations outside of the church, of course, they all felt the same way I did, and the way you did. And lots of them today find themselves within the structure of the church, and but more and more of them are getting excommunicated because they believe the way that there's more than the fear, that it's beyond the fear and the control thing. And I think we all know that we see that sort of falling apart on many levels. So I had read a book many years ago by Glenda Green called Love Without End. Some of you may know that. And she had a supernatural experience with the Christ energy, and wrote a book, and I happened to read it, and was really resonated to the truth that was in that book. And so I went to Sedona with many other people and met Glenda, and Glenda started a church because of a man called Lee Allen Peterson, who is a bishop in the apostolic line of succession. And for those of you that don't know what that is, that's, from the apostles down, people that were ordained within the quote-unquote Roman structure, but many of whom left. So we know we have the old Catholic tradition, we have the liberal Catholic Church, and we have lots of movements that are quote Catholic, which just really means universal, and not Roman domained, not in the control of Rome, which much to their dismay. And there are many women who are leaving the Roman Church and becoming ordained because in the Middle Ages, this is interesting about history, you know, we have the true story, the whole story, and then we have history. No offense to the gentleman sitting here. But it's the history books are written by the winners, and we don't always get the whole picture about the truth. And in the Dark Ages, it was very difficult to travel. And in the religious community, it was very difficult for the leaders of the various churches in Egypt and Germany and all over the world to come to Rome and be in concert with the Pope. So, in Belgium, the archbishop there, or whatever the highest rank was at that time, appealed to the Pope because they couldn't travel. They would be killed. People couldn't make pilgrimages on the Camino because in France, so that's why they built the labyrinths inside the cathedrals. It was some way to do pilgrimage because it was so much a part of culture to do pilgrimage each year. But they couldn't. Dark Ages, very dangerous. If we think it's dangerous now, it doesn't hold a candle to the Dark Ages. It's just on a grander scale now, not as many people then, but it's the same energy. And so he appealed to the Pope, and the Pope granted him autocephalous standing, which means he was separate, he could rule, as we would say, autonomously. However, he was still in the apostolic line of succession of Rome. I forget the name of the Pope who did it, but the Pope Benedict would say, mistake, big mistake today. But it has stood since the 1100s. And there was a bishop who got really kind of annoyed with, I guess, the Pope, and decided to start ordaining women, which in history, when the apostles and St. Paul ordained many women, they were in charge of churches in Corinth and all of that. You just don't read about that in the Bible, because then you have Constantine who sort of manipulated things a little bit. And so, but the truth is there were always women leaders in the church, even in the times of Christ. His closest apostle was, of course, Mary Magdalene and his mother. Two closest were women. And there were many women who went out, not just the 12 people we read about in the Bible. There were 70 or 80 of them that ultimately went out from the time that Christ ascended till, you know, and then many more after that. And so, trouble with translations and languages, and you know how it is. You can't even take an English song and turn it into Spanish without a real challenge. So can you imagine going from Aramaic, which is actually the language of Christ, you know, through Greek, who were philosophical, and you know, so things got miscommunicated. And so I'm ordained in an apostolic line of succession that is valid and recognized by the Roman Catholic Church, which is really kind of a hoot. And Bishop Lee Allen Peterson, who was a Roman Franciscan, left and went into a more liberal movement, but he didn't lose his validity as a bishop. And I met him through my encounter with Glenda when she wanted to start a church, and it's called Spirit's Church. And I was ordained, and then I studied with him for 7 years and became a Roman Catholic female priest. And I have to tell you, my first ceremony, my first ritual of the symbolic breaking of the bread was one of the most powerful experiences of my life. And so I carry that with me. It's something I seem to have always carried with me as a child. And of course, there's no doctrine or dogma in these movements. It's all about love. And so when I first left the Roman Catholic Church, I was looking and found the Alliance of Divine Love in Florida, and the name immediately had my attention. And I studied with them, and I was ordained in 1998. And then I became a priest in 2003. And it's just been an incredible journey. And you know what? It's all the same message. And for me, it's just bringing together both and. It's not either or. It's both and. So this is just who I am as a spiritual being. And this is just really about my journey. And but I can marry my Italian Catholic relatives, and their marriages are recognized by the Roman Catholic Church. That really set a couple of grandmothers a little a tizzy. We had one wedding. My cousin Lauren got married, and the grandmother of the groom came up to me before the wedding, and she said, "You look so darling." I had my
vestments on, and she said, "But will their marriage be really legal?" And I just put my arm around her and I said, "Even the Pope will recognize it." He won't be too thrilled about it, but he has no choice because they wrote the encyclical.
Oh, that's great.
So there's my story.
Fabulous. Well, you know, it's so amazing because, you know, what we're finding right now is as our earth and consciousness is shifting, it comes back to balance. And we have been dominated so much by the male consciousness. And the feminine is re-emerging. And it's really about the balance of the two. We've been so out of balance, and this is a great opportunity, you know, for you to share with all of us where we are today on the planet, you know, coming back into balance, which I know is a big teaching and belief of yours. And say a few words about that, because I think everybody is noticing a lot of things happening right now.
And we're all aware of it on all levels: political, social, economic, you know, families. And what I have found through my inner experiences going through these journeys and just having the courage to stand up and say, I want to be that. I can remember when I was first ordained by Bishop Lee Allen Peterson, he said, "Okay, now you're a priest. Do you want to be called mother?" I said, "No, I have 2 kids. I'm already a mother." He said, "Well, what do you want to be called?" I said, "Father." And he said, "You want to be called father?" And I said, "Yes." "Father Linda Marie." And he thought I was kidding. And I said, "I'm not kidding." He said, "Okay." I said, "Listen, why does father have to have the same meaning as a male term as mother?" Because in Aramaic, which I've studied for several years, the word Abba, we have now understood in the West world to mean father. But in Aramaic, the word Abba isn't about a gender. It's about the provider of the home. And when the father would be the one, say, who might pass away before the mother, the children would call the father Abba. But when the provider wasn't there, and say the mom became responsible as a single parent, which, you know, it just doesn't happen now, it happened back then too. And she would be called Abba, which means loving provider, the kind of love that only could come from the parent, not the father or the mother, not the male or the female, but the provider, the unconditional loving provider. So Abba isn't male, although in our Western thinking it has become understood as male. And that's fine, because how do you separate? You can't separate. It takes a male and a female to create life. And it should never be separated, but it's together. It's, you know, it's like this idea of Darwin. I love Reverend Michael Dowdy talks about creationism and Darwinism. And, you know, the idea of the survival of the fittest. You know, we've taken that to mean what in this culture? Strength. You know, we're going to conquer and we're going to be strong. But that's not what it really means. Fittest means, how do we fit together? Isn't the male and female that creates life fitting together? You know, not, physically and metaphorically, in many ways, we have to blend together. And so survival of the fittest doesn't necessarily mean strength. It means, how can we cooperate? You know, I was on Charlotte's radio show the other day, and a gal called in, and she was very fearful that we were going to have a new world order and implants and all this kind of stuff. And I said, Charlotte was really cool. She said, Linda, would you like to take this question? And so, unaffected, I said to her, well, what would you like to see happening out there? And I said, you know, on some level we are all co-creating what we see out there. And some of us see things differently. I mean, if you took 10 people and put them around an elephant and asked them to all describe an elephant, you'd get a different story, depending where they were on the elephant. Well, it's the same thing with our world. And so where are we in our consciousness? Where are we in our co-creative understanding? And we're projecting out there. So it was a very interesting conversation, and the fact of the matter is we must cooperate, and at least in our inner consciousness. But we first have to know how powerful we are on that inner plane, and how powerful the divine feminine is in that fitting together. And for a very long time, I think in our generation, we're seeing more priests and female church leaders. I know in the Methodist Church and the Episcopal Church and many other denominations. I think there's even a type of Baptist church where now they're ordaining women. So things are changing. Why? Because our hearts are changing, because thank God for the men out there who have allowed us and welcomed us. I mean, Bishop Lee, one of the reasons he left the Roman Catholic Church was because, you know, he believed in the feminine. He believed that God is both and, not either or. And so there are a lot of priests, Ron Roth and many, many, many others who have taught us throughout these last few generations about we need to be inclusive. In Matthew 5, it talks about how the rain falls on the good and the evil, and the sun is made to shine on the just and the unjust. And then it says, so be ye perfect, like God is perfect. And when I took my Aramaic studies one year, we talked about that scripture. And the word perfect was mistranslated. The word in Aramaic means inclusive. So be ye inclusive. Now go back and think about that. The rain falls on the good and the bad. The sun shines on the just and the unjust. Isn't that inclusive? Why would it say perfect when it really meant inclusive? Therefore be ye inclusive as God is inclusive. And those understandings have really changed my life. And ADL allows for that. And now more mainstream denominations are opening their hearts and allowing for that expansion of consciousness. And interestingly, a lot of the female ordained ministers in whatever denomination, we really all want the same thing. We just need to have the courage to express it as individually as we are created, because we really are all the same anyway. So that's my story, and I'm sticking to it.
Very cool story. Well, you know, I want to take us down another path here that we've had a lot of conversation about this weekend, and it's been very interesting because, you know, you are not afraid to speak your mind, and I know that, for example, people in recovery or families in enabling, you know, you see sort of the pattern of what creates dysfunction in families. And, you know, I think at this point in time, people are wanting to stop that cycle. And you've definitely been an example of that. And I'd like you to share, I don't want to ask any specific questions because I don't want to say anything that might be breaking any anonymity here. But whatever you care to share about that, I think you've got a hugely powerful message on that.
Thank you, Charlotte. Well, as most of us in our families, whether it's our immediate family or extended families or close friends, we all have somebody who's being challenged with drugs or, you know, overindulging in one thing or another, and it's becoming quite a problem, or quite a challenge, I should say, in our society. But I think it's bringing us, like every challenge, we don't grow when things are hunky-dory. You know, resistance is what creates the diamond. You know, it's the resistance of nature. And so I think it's this resistance that causes us to grow. And I know even in my own family, there's my grandson has gotten into some drugs and had to go to rehab and all of that. And what I was watching was the generation of my own children who were so enabling and couldn't really understand that. I mean, it's so interesting about children today. When I grew up, if somebody in the neighborhood got a new refrigerator and there was a box, I mean, we could make all kinds of things out of that. You know, puppet theaters, and we had such creative imagination. I didn't watch a lot of TV. What do we have, like 5 channels? You know, we didn't watch a lot of TV, so we interacted. We fit together. We did more of fitting together. But what I think what's happening in our society, at least in this last generation or two, is we've created the separateness. You play these little video games, and a kid is all by themselves. And now there's some new studies that just came out this last month or two that suggest and really point to the idea that it's not good to put babies in front of televisions or anything that overstimulates the brain. And we're going to talk about the brain in the workshop today, because the brain begins to adapt to the overstimulation. And they're thinking this could be the cause of a lot of hyperactivity, because the brain is being so overstimulated, and we grow slowly when we were babies. We discover slowly, and then we experiment slowly. And so you imagine if you inundate children with all this tremendous stimuli that has now become so violent. Even cartoons are violent. And so they're suggesting that this could be a cause of the way children are today and are so hyperactive. And I've seen it with my grandchild. And so what's the solution? Well, it's not an easy solution, but we have to be not enabling, and I've had an experience in that in my own family where you just have to say, okay, I'm going to let go and let God. That's a slippery slope. And I can only do it for me. I can't do it for my grandchild, I can't do it for my daughter, I can't do it for my son. I can only do it for me. And that's the journey I've been on in the last 2 years. And I love him, but I have a boundary. And we've had a discussion about the boundary. And so I understand the fear of doing that. But at the same time, I think what's happened in talking to some young people, that what you find out is, why did my parents wait so long to put the boundary down? You know, and so it's something for us to consider, you know. If you're honoring the truth of the consciousness of God within you, whether you call that Christ, Buddha, it doesn't matter, it's all the same thing, then you have to trust that in them. So when I think about my grandson, instead of getting fearful, I see the Christ or the wisdom or the light in him. I know it's there. It cannot not be there. And so you have to let go and trust it. So whenever he comes to my mind, before I let the fear emotion start to, you know, push my button, I'll say, wait a minute, I see the presence within him. And that presence will prevail. Whether I see that or not doesn't matter. It will prevail. It always prevails. We always are successful in the end. Whether we're in this body or not, we get to the truth of who we really are. So I would offer that. Of course, in my one-on-one dealings with people who have the situation, you know, I'm kind of a little bit more outspoken about it, but but it's, you know, based on the situation. But it's really kind of interesting why God puts you through experiences and then he turns around and has you help others. It's just remarkable how this whole fitting together thing works. It's a tapestry that we're all creating, and it's just a miracle. And you know what? There's some mystery to it, and I'm okay with the mystery part. I don't have to know every single detail anymore like I used to. So,
well, that reminds me of just a simple quote from A Course in Miracles: "Everything is for your own best interest." And it's when our ego mind gets in there and tries to figure it out that we get, you know, crazed with it. But if we just turn it over to Spirit, it all works out in a beautiful way, much more than we could ever, our thinking mind could ever imagine. Now, but I also, you know, like the idea, say what you mean and mean what you say.
Absolutely, you have to be. If you're going to say no, you got to mean no, and if you're going to say yes, you need to deliver. And I didn't see that a lot with my own kids. You know, they meant to, but then things got in the way and so forth. And it was never that way when I was growing up. When my dad said no, you better run the other way. And I realized there was some fear in that, but you know, I don't know. I just there has to be an honoring. And so when things were really going down within my family, I just said, you know, one day I said, you know what, the best gift I can give my grandson is to be the best me I can be. The happiest, most well-adjusted, at peace human being I can be. Because that's what I want to project out into the world. And I know the presence is there with him as well. And so when I say no, I mean it. And when I say yes, I live up to it. And if I can't, I'm the first one to admit that I can't. And so if we can just do those simple things, you know, and not worry about winning their friendship, but being that parent. It's enough time to be friends with a child, you know, when they grow up. And so I don't know if Dr. Spock had anything to do with that. I mean, it's just interesting if you just sort of observe it. It's really fascinating how we've evolved to this. But my grandson is my best teacher because he made me put the pedal to the metal. The rubber hit the road now. I had to walk my talk, and I had to do it. And it was it easy? It was simple, but it wasn't easy. But I'm doing it. And I'm happy, and I'm here, and he's out there somewhere. Sometimes we see him, sometimes we don't, but I know he's fine. I really don't believe it. I really don't think it. I really know it.
Good for you. And it's, yeah, and I really think that, you know, these tools, although that's with your grandson, it also, in any relationship we have, you know, with our spouses or friends or work relationships, wherever we are, you know, we have to really come from that space of trust and knowing and really honoring what we say and do. And when we do that, I think we're creating a much stronger foundation. So I honor you, and Linda sees herself, and we can all sort of share this vision as the Dr. Phil of recovery here. You know, she's not going to, you know, she could, if people would call in and really, and Linda could just say, you know, this is the way you got to do it. And when we come from that place, it's remarkable. And you really are a great example, and I appreciate that.
Thank you, Charlotte.
Yeah. So you also have a radio show.
Yes.
Tell us about
Actually,
that.
I have 2 radio shows.
Yeah, well, tell us.
I have one on the Art of Living Well Network called Consider This, and my co-host is a wonderful gal who's walked more of the Eastern path. She's a yogi, for 35 years a yoga teacher, and knows everything about the Buddhist path, and you know, I'm much more a Christic philosophy person. So we've come together, and we have this really neat radio show called Consider This. And we have authors and filmmakers and all kinds of people on, and ministers and not ministers, and we just come from different perspectives, and it's just a wonderful conversation. And if anyone's here is got something they'd like to talk about on the radio, I'd love for you to contact us. We're on every Monday on Blog Talk Radio on the Art of Living Well Network, and we've been doing this about a year now, and it's just so much fun. And then I have another radio show, which is more about the Christic apostolic philosophy, which is really my passion. And that's on Tuesday nights at 8 o'clock. We have our own network now called the Way of Consciousness Network. The show is The Way of Consciousness. And we talk about primarily the way of mastery, which is really the Course in Miracles, but from a much more heart, talking about everything coming out of the heart, although the Course in Miracles does too as well. It's really the same message, but just from a different place on the elephant, if you will. And it's all about the same truth. And we kind of use that as our focus, and but we have authors and all kinds of people on the show. And in that vein, I've just created a new women's, trying to bring the sacred feminine more into the everyday practice, and helping women to realize how much of the sacred feminine they really are, each and every one of us, and to stand more in that identity. And so I'm doing retreats. I'll be doing the first one in Santa Fe, New Mexico in May. I brought some flyers if anyone's interested, and it's going to be a 4-night, 5-day, it'll be really 4 solid days of recognizing that divinity of the sacred feminine, if you will, based on my research of Aramaic, of Shekinah Ruha. Ruha in Aramaic means spirit, and Shekinah is a word that was even used in ancient Hebrew to mean wisdom, Holy Spirit, wisdom, and that's where the Holy Spirit idea came from. And so even today the church refers to the Holy Spirit as female. If any of you read The Shack,
Right.
I mean, love the end of that book. Written by a man, by the way, I love that, who had a real experience, and this really happened to him. So it's about Shekinah Ruha, which is the inherent sacred feminine of holy wisdom, which has always been referred to in many traditions, historically, as, quote, feminine, not masculine. And so we've kind of lost that in history, particularly where Constantine came in and sort of rearranged the books of the Bible and took some things out and whatever happened. And that was good because it caused us resistance. And look how many churches came out of all that. Resistance. People had experiences and started all kinds of churches. And to me, that's all good. It's all because we're all still on the journey. We're trying to find the truth, and the truth is not out there. We can build the best cathedral in the world, and they're good. I love to sit in them, but we can't find the truth out there. We can find it in here. And so these workshops are a way of helping us to find it through ceremony and ritual and tizay and different practices. And so if anyone's interested in joining us in Santa Fe in May, I'd be happy to talk to you about it and give you some information.
Great. And what about your seminar this afternoon?
This afternoon, we're going to talk about this big cosmological thing. You know, the Earth is changing, and that's what this woman on the radio show, when she called in the other day, was talking about. There's so many changes. We're going to talk about how the micro and the macro, which is the cosmology of the world, the macro, the big universe, and how that everything shifts everything. And we're going to talking about. I was thinking about the extreme home makeover one night. I thought, we're kind of going through an extreme cosmological makeover, on the micro and the macro. So I came up with that title, and Charlotte went, "Oh, that's interesting. I wonder what that's going to be about." So what it's going to be about is since we project from the inside out, we're going to talk about the right and left brain, how the linear logical thinking brain and the more creative brain. And if those of you know Dr. Jill Bolte Taylor, have you seen or heard of her work? She's a neuroscientist, a brain scientist, who had an extraordinary experience as a brain scientist. All because when she was born and grew up, her brother was schizophrenic. And all their life growing up, the family went through so much with her brother being schizophrenic, that she devoted her life to studying the brain. So when you devote your heart to something like that, God brings you through the most extraordinary experiences. And she was doing research at Harvard, and she had a stroke. Her left brain stroked, and her right brain witnessed it. And if you just Google Jill Bolte Taylor and go on YouTube, you'll see her presenting. She travels all over the world now talking about how to get our right brain more engaged, because that's where peace is. That's where bliss is. That's where the center of this, seat of the soul. That's where it is. She's convinced because of her experience. And what is remarkable about her story is when she finally passed out, she was able to contact someone before that happened. It took her 5 or 6 years to recover from that experience. I can't even wrap my mind around that. She had to learn to walk and talk and all the things, and now she's a remarkable woman who had this gift from God. And now she's changing so many people, helping so many people to go within. And so we're going to do some techniques that she's recommended that we do to kind of help us in our day-to-day life. Simple little things, you won't believe how simple they are, that can help to engage more of our less dominant side of the brain. And we're going to do a couple exercises that are going to bring the so-called right brain up, the less dominant side up. But the idea is to be in balance. Everything is about the balance of nature. So that's what this seminar is going to be about. It's going to be hands-on and interactive and experiential.
Exactly. I'm looking forward to it. And we're going to see if there's any questions. But before we do that, how can people contact you and your website information?
Okay. My website is Divinity Alliance, Divinity Alliance.org. And my email address is the same, Divinity Alliance, but it's at Comcast.net. And I don't even have this new seminar that we just created for May up on there yet, but lots of other information. And my email address is Linda Marie 423 Linda Marie 423 at Comcast.net. And I welcome any reflective feedback that you might have for this experience. I would be so appreciative of your input and insights, insights that you may have from practicing some of this, or anything that we may have said or done here today. And my life now is devoted to teaching and counseling and retreat ministry. So, and I'm really blessed, and I'm so grateful to be here. I thank you, Charlotte, and thank all of you for being here.
Thank you. Any questions? Does anyone have a question for?
I love questions.
Yeah.
Yes.
What you're doing is fascinating and very inspiring. I have a question about the Catholicism.
Yeah.
Are there nuns?
Yes.
In the
Well, actually, there are some orders that have nuns, and I don't think they consecrate or do like communion services. But mostly the movements that I'm in are not really having an order so-called of nuns, but having priests. You can become a deacon, you can become a minister, or you can become someone that's more interested in the sacraments, which then would be on the priest level, all the way up to bishop. And bishop is just the main teacher, is really all that means. It's not any more hierarchy than that. And it's just continuing to pass down the wisdom. But it's mostly, quote-unquote, priestly. In other words, the right to create ceremony and ritual for everyone.
Is there any information about churches that practice that around this area?
Absolutely. If you Google liberal Catholic Church or old Catholic Church, you'll find churches. There are some here in North Carolina. The Progressive Christian Alliance, which I belong to also, there are some churches involved in that overall umbrella that are quote-unquote Catholic, if you will. Where, in other words, they're more, the services they do would probably include a communion service. You know, they're sacramental, but they're not dogmatic or you know, anything like that.
That would be interesting to experience as a
Former Catholic, yes,
Oh,
yes.
yeah, for sure.
It's wonderful. I mean, the first time I did communion, I was ordained with 3 other men, and this little chubby Italian lady, and it was really kind of interesting. But when I stood there with the bishop and these 3 men and myself, and actually was a part of all of that, it was just so profound. I guess because it's always been in my inner heart all these years, and it was like a fulfillment for me personally, because I was born into that like you were. So yeah, look, liberal Catholic Church, old Catholic Church movements, and there's also a wonderful website, and I wish I knew it exactly, but it's Women Catholic Priests, if I'm not mistaken, that come out of the same line that I do, and they're growing and growing and growing. So, and they're beginning to start churches and things, and I'll tell you, the movement is more about home church too. There's a lot of these women who get together and they do home church, which is kind of how they, you know, Christ went to people's houses. You know, we kind of think there were tents and people were nomadic, so you kind of followed them wherever they were and you sat inside the tent and you just talked. That was it for many, 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 many hundreds of years. We just forget about that because we're living in these times hard to relate. But that's really how it was done. And so some movements are coming back to that home church kind of thing, and I've done that at my house a few times. It's pretty cool.
That's great. Bill?
Yes, sir.
You talk about the rise of feminism in the church.
Mm-hmm.
Is the old Catholic or the Roman Catholic Church, are you really seeing much in the way of women power getting in there?
Well, you know, I have a lot of friends who are nuns, and I don't know if we'll see in our lifetime whether women will finally become ordained like they are in the Episcopal Church. I know a lot of Roman Catholic priests and nuns who have left and have become ordained in the Episcopal Church and in the Methodist and some other denominations. But at this point, particularly with Pope Benedict, who has a very ancient idea of the way things should look, you know, he's very different from the Pope before him, and he's unrelenting in saying it can only be a male. And so I don't know that it would change. I mean, I think we're part of that creation. I think each and every one of us who can be okay with that. I'm not angry at Pope Benedict. I mean, it can be both and for me, and it can't for him. It can be just either or, and that's fine, you know. But I don't know if we'll see it in our lifetime, but I really believe we will eventually, because you know it's women who support the Catholic Church when you really get right down to it. There are more women in attendance in most churches than there are men for some reason. I don't know, it's particularly the Catholic Church. And you know, if they continue to make them head long enough, you know, they might just be their own undoing. And isn't that what usually happens to, if you look at history, all the societies and all the cultures, don't they pretty much do themselves in when they become more and more and more rigid? What happens? I mean, look at Egypt. They're buried one on top of the other. They're excavating one civilization after another, and when what is it? Power corrupts, and absolute power corrupts absolutely. We are on our own undoing. So I don't want to see that happen. I would rather them just say, "Wow, you know, maybe God is both," you know, and not have to go through that suffering. But it'll happen eventually. It's going to happen in spite of them because it's already happening, you know. And what I love about many of the women, I can't speak for all, it's not a belligerent thing. It's not an angry thing. It's gratitude. And it was men that started the ability for women to be able to come ordained. And so, you know, you got to remember that. You got to keep that in perspective. And it's also women that raise men. And so we can't blame other people. We are the ones who raise men and have them think, you know, what they think. And so we have to begin to take responsibility, because it's not either or. It's both and. We are just as much responsible for that mentality out there as they are. Because we gave birth to them. And we got into the Darwin, it's survival of the fittest, when it's, honey, we got to learn how to fit together. And so That's why my mission to sort of work with women, to make them try to come to that consciousness in their own way, so that we can shift it in future generations, because that's the only way it changes.
Yes, and thank you, thank you. Any other questions before, yes? Betty?
The name of your radio show again?
Consider This,
Right?
and the other one is The Way of Consciousness. So if you go to blogtalkradio.com/consider this is one, and blogtalkradio.com/way of consciousness is the other. One's on Mondays, one's on Tuesdays. Thank you. Thank you, Betty.
Okay, time for one more. Anyone else? Well, Linda, thank you so much
Oh,
for being
thank you.
here
This has
today, and
been
thank all of you all for being
so
such a
awesome.
wonderful